Really excited to have Rebecca today.
So Jamie, do you want me to go ahead with an intro, or are you still juggling numbers?
Let's see, we have 17, so we can probably get started.
Okay. Yeah, we usually do intros, but we don't want to use up half our call doing intros.
Right.
So most of you have already probably read Jamie's short introduction of Rebecca in the invite. Right now, she's director of the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Foundation. She has a pretty diverse history, including 2 books about farmers getting started. But to give you an idea of how interconnected this network is and really what a keystone issue meat processing is, I'm just going to trace the pathway of how we ended up on this phone call. In preparation for Mike Callicrete's call with us last time, or a couple of times ago, I started looking at some of the links on his website and wound up on this niche meat processor on a PowerPoint that their former director had done, and discovered that the former director and one of the people she was working with were both people I had met under different conditions. Lauren Gwynn, I think I met her through somebody in Idaho that I'd been working with, and then Arian, a young man she was collaborating with. I first met him, I don't know, 100 years ago at an international organic livestock conference in Minnesota. And then I bumped into him again in Des Moines, Iowa, when I was there with some people helping get the Organic Beef Producers Co-op set up, working with O-Farm. And he originally had come up to me in Minnesota because his mother was a professional chef who had been purchasing our lamb while she was in California. And when I tried to track Lauren and Arian down to inquire about this call, I learned that Lauren had handed over the reins to Rebecca. Lauren is now working, she's still with the extension in Oregon, and she's working on continuing this work, but working on more regional food systems, very much analogous to some of the things that Mike Callicrete talked about. And as Rebecca said a bit ago, I actually met her several years ago. I think it was California. She was working with some people that I was working with the Wild Farm Alliance. And I haven't really been keeping track of her, except her name periodically pops up in a number of policy capacities, as well as dealing with a variety of livestock management and slaughter issues. So it seems like she's a really good person to bring together different geographies, different types of livestock, but particularly focusing on the issues surrounding building a resilient, decentralized meat packing system. So thank you so much for giving us some time, Rebecca, and have at it.
All right. Thank you, Becky, for that introduction. And now I do recall meeting you back in the day when I was volunteering with the Wild Farm Alliance. So the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network is a pretty unique cooperative extension program. It's called a community of practice. And so it's really made up of practitioners in the field working up and down the niche meat supply chain, from producers to processors, wholesalers, distributors, up to retailers. And we work together to just solve mutual problems and create more value chain coordination up and down the supply chain. But our bread and butter audience really are the small scale meat processors. And then this one, running your facility, is more about best practices for managing your employees, equipment, operational flow, efficiencies, stuff like that. And then we have quite a bit of information on mobile slaughter and processing. I get contacted from folks all over the world wanting to learn more about mobile slaughter, and we have probably the most complete set of case studies on mobile slaughter under that tab. And then we have webinars that we put on, videos and other case studies. So that's our website. And then I just wanted to show you one other thing that we have going on. soon, and some of you maybe have heard about it, but we are collaborating with Tommy Bass of Montana State University on this, along with University of Wyoming, Colorado State, and Mesa Lands Community College in New Mexico. So this is a 5-state effort funded by Risk Management Agency and a couple private foundations to develop an online short course for meat producers to learn how to direct market meat. And we actually have a in-person location in Montana, COVID willing. They should be meeting in Billings, but that may not happen. But the course is 100% available online as well. If folks could mute their phones when they're not talking, that would be great. And so this course is really designed for folks who raise livestock, have a couple years of experience, and want to learn how to direct market meat. I was just going to show you really quickly what the curriculum is. So we're going to start off with marketing, then we're going to go to production. The production modules are really focused on finishing animals for high quality meat. We're going to do a hoof to rail carcass evaluation. We're going to talk about the basics of meat processing and working with your processor, cutting instructions, packaging, labeling, cutting for different markets, maximizing carcass value. And then we're going to talk about selling meat in different market channels. And we're going to have an optional hog module featuring one of your producers from Montana, Ken Broughton of Farm to Market Pork. And hi, Tommy, I see you there. And then we're also going to have an optional meat pricing module where you're going to learn all about how to price your cuts of meat. So this is kind of a new foray for NPAN to focus on producer education so that they become better customers of processors, and we build better collaborations between processors and producers, because without viable producers who have strong markets, our processors can't stay in business, and vice versa. We can't have viable producers without strong processors. So this is a new effort of ours. So what was I going to get into now? So I gave a webinar a couple days ago about what the impacts of COVID have been on small scale meat processing. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of the key points and then get your take on how it's playing out in Montana. So as many of you are aware, the first few months of the pandemic, there were some plant closures and some of the large packers, which backed up slaughter capacity quite a bit. Animals kept growing, and unfortunately, a bunch of animals had to be euthanized because there was nowhere for them to go, mainly hogs and poultry. That didn't happen so much on the beef side. Beef did get bigger, and a lot of them ended up turning into ground beef. And now apparently there's a oversupply of frozen ground beef inventory in this country. But at the same time, there was a lot of panic buying. So meat department sales rose 32% from March through August, and claims-based products, so those are niche meat products and values-based products, saw unprecedented growth rates, gaining 32% in dollars from March through July. So not all was bad there. But with a massive contraction of the restaurant and food service industry, a lot of meat was in the wrong format. So meat that was primarily cut into primals and subprimals all of a sudden needed to be cut into retail case-ready meat for grocery stores and online meat sales, because that's where consumers were getting their meat. And a lot of the large packers are not equipped for that kind of cutting. They don't have the equipment, they don't have the staff who can do that kind of cutting. And so small and mid-scale processors saw, a huge shift of processing into their plants. And as many of you are acutely aware, small scale processors have seen way more demand than they can possibly keep up with. And slaughter slots and cut and wrap appointments are booked out, 6, 12, 24 months in advance in some locations. But I have spoken with a lot of processors who have said that that demand has already started to slack off, and they don't believe a lot of those animals will actually materialize next year. Farmers went ahead and booked out slots way far in advance, in some cases not even having a live animal on the ground yet. And the processors are pretty dubious that those animals are actually going to come through, because if the market demand starts to slack, as it already has, those farmers won't have the same demand for those animals, and hence they won't need the processing services quite extensively. So I believe that probably by next fall, winter, we'll go back to kind of the normal seasonal crunch that we see in our small scale processing plants, where, you know, the fall, early winter is incredibly busy with livestock and hunted game filling up their coolers, and then we'll probably have more openings in winter and spring when there are less animals being harvested. So Montana is going to see probably some pretty big shifts, and I really wanted to open this up more to a discussion with you all, because you're the experts there. But I think with the millions of dollars being invested into small scale plants in your state, I think the last article I read, something like 54 plants had received those grants. There's probably more because your governor keeps releasing more dollars. But I think you're going to see a lot of expansion of capacity going forward, which is great for producers. However, I think it's unclear whether or not those processors are going to continue to see that demand. Luckily, this is a grant program, so they don't have to pay that money back. But if it was, if they did have to pay it back, I think they're going to see cash flow declines going forward as that demand starts to slack. So hopefully they'll figure out how to keep their plants busy and running. But a lot of that's going to depend on market pull and farmers actually creating viable brands and getting meat into market channels. So it's not the processors that drive the ship, it's the consumer demand that drives the whole ship. So what do folks think about all the dollars coming into your meat processing facilities, and what do you think sort of the long-term forecast of that is going to look like? I open the floor.
Rebecca, before everybody makes comments about that, I just want to step back for a second and explain that one of the reasons why I got interested in getting this network to participate in our conversations was because in the talk that Lauren Gwynn had given, one of the specific topics they focused on was the fact that in their research and investigations of plants all over the country, they realized that, you know, the perennial refrain we hear that, oh, we need more small plants, was a little bit of an oversimplification. And they had really delved into the issue of seasonality and how can you make a small plant pencil out if you don't have a somewhat regular supply. So this just dovetails in with our earlier discussions about how does Montana address seasonality. But it also connects to what Rebecca was just saying, is that if we're going to be dealing with volatility in the markets for the foreseeable future, which I think is likely, you know, we sort of have to play a game of trying to build markets while also trying to build production capacity. So it's with those issues in mind that I'd like to kind of move ahead with how we can both respond to the future, but also help carve out a future at the same time. And it's a bit of a balancing act. Anyway, I'd love to hear everybody else's comments about Rebecca's question.
This is Jeff Shedinsky. I tend to agree with Rebecca entirely. I do think that there's a great danger that we're going to move quickly to overcapacity. And that's just because we had such a change in world that we had to go through. But I think it's going to go back and it's going to kind of bite people. And that is why I'm still pushing for, interstate ability to access interstate markets as being critical, at least regional markets, because that at least will potentially give greater potential for outlets. If we could sell to Boise, or we could sell to Spokane, sell to other markets besides just Montana. I think that
So this is Tommy. I wanted to just clarify something for Rebecca, some context for the Montana discussion. The majority of our plants are under state inspection, which you could already be aware of. And then I think we have about 5 plants under USDA inspection that in the context of beef, hogs, lamb can do, kill all the way through retail packaging. And then our numbers get a little more skewed because there's a number of inspected kitchens and the pasty shops in Butte that make a USDA inspected product to sell. And I feel like our local meat sector in Montana has been pretty strongly propped up by the culinary sector with all of our resorts and tourist areas. However, like the greater Yellowstone area has reported highest tourism rates ever here at the end of first pandemic summer. And those people have to eat. But then here in Bozeman, our dine-in establishments have obviously been incredibly hobbled by the necessary social distancing and capacity guidelines. So these are some other variables at play that I think, will the culinary sector recover for more than takeout and limited dining? Because it's been such a crutch, a helpful crutch, right? But I think part of the strength of our local meat sector in the past.
Any other thoughts on sort of attempting to forecast what may be coming in the next couple of years and your expanded processing capacity?
So this is Walter Schweitzer. I'm president of Montana Farmers Union, and I've been participating on this call pretty regularly. And so it's going to sound like a broken record to most of the people on this call. But, we're not talking about the big elephant in the room here, and that's the corporate monopolies and the protectionist rules that are in our food safety inspection service and our federal meat Inspection Act, FMIA, FSIS, that really allows these corporate monopolies to take advantage of us. It's like the state inspected plants that are not allowed to ship across state lines, and yet a Brazilian plant, which is not a whole lot different than our state inspected plants, are allowed to sell anywhere in the United States. And you look down and try to do any sort of model for a meat processing facility 5 years out, and it becomes goddamn hard to make sense out of it because you can't compete against a corporate monopoly. Now, I do agree that there is potential for niche marketing. I think it's exciting, and I'm fully invested in trying to make that happen. But until we talk about and do something about the elephant in the room, the corporate monopolies, we're all just spinning our wheels. We're all spinning our wheels. But I do have a question for you. That's how do you clean this mobile plant between conventional livestock and organic livestock?
Yeah, so a mobile slaughter unit can be certified organic, and the only differences are the cleaning products that you use. And then you obviously have to have good record keeping and keep your products segregated. But that's true for any animals that you process. You always have to have, carcass tags and record keeping. It's really—
So on your webpage, does it list the chemicals needed or that you can use for cleaning?
We put on a webinar about organic certification a couple years ago, and we go into the different chemicals. We don't we don't go into like brand names and stuff like that, but yeah, I can get you some more information. It's pretty simple. I think people make it out to be this gigantic thing, and it's really not. And the truth is, meat processors are already really good at record keeping. That's their life. So this is just another couple pages of record keeping. Yeah.
Walt, as somebody that has addressed that issue, I guess, and we're organic, and most everything else that goes through the plant we use is not. The only thing you have to do is, if we go into a clean plant, our stuff is processed first, all the organic, then the other product can follow behind it without any cleanup. We've had one time in the last 10 years where we had kind of an emergency and we had to pay for a wash down of the kill floor in order to get an animal in. But other than that, and over 10 years and, hundreds, maybe thousands of animals, that hasn't been nearly the issue to work with that we all expected when we started.
Thanks, Wes. And it looks like you've got record keeping all behind you right there, huh?
Well, some, yeah. Labels, I guess, is what I've got my computer standing on.
I was going to go back to Walter's previous comment about the elephant in the room. I have a couple thoughts about that, but not necessarily solutions. First of all, because you guys have a robust state meat inspection program, is there any reason why you guys haven't applied for cooperative and interstate shipment yet? Anyone here with your Montana Department of Ag and know why you haven't applied for that yet?
Rebecca, I'll tell you the history of that, because that was a long time ago when we tried to get that law and get that program started. And I pushed very hard because I worked on the national policy to get it. And basically they said it costs too much, it's duplicative, numerous. You might as well just become a federally inspected plant anyway. And we're not going to bother with it. That was the statement at the time. Now, I don't know subsequently if anybody's been interested. I saw this morning Iowa now is moving, so then I guess there are 7 states using it. Personally, I just think it's a duplicative, crazy process, and it'd be much simpler just to change the law as it should have been changed, and was in fact really changed a long time ago.
Well, I mean,
Hey, this is
okay. Sorry, go ahead.
This is Court Jensen. I'm with the Montana Department of Agriculture. I'm their attorney. In Montana, meat processing and inspection is handled on the regulatory side by the Department of Livestock, not the Department of Agriculture, because we have separate departments. The change in the 2014 Farm Bill that allowed state inspected plants to theoretically go through, part of it was the feds never implemented clear guidance on how that's supposed to work. And so you have some states now challenging that to basically say, can we have our state meat czar? The language that causes everyone to get tripped over, though, is it says to have a state inspected program, you'd have to meet all the standards of a federal inspected program, which includes like an on-site inspector and everything else. So there's no cost savings theoretically of doing it. And so you'd be recreating an identical program to the federal inspection one to get only part of the benefits of the federal inspected one, which I think has been the hang up. If basically it became a non-solution. It was just another way of stating the same thing that was the original federal rule. And until there's some actual cost savings or regulatory savings, no one's probably going to implement this unless they believe the federal inspectors are just refusing to do the inspections.
Well, I mean, 8
So,
states now have done it. So
This is Mike Cunningham with the Department of Livestock, and so I just want to kind of correct some of the statements that were just made. So in talking about cooperative interstate shippers, that really is different than our state inspected program, as most know.
Yeah.
So the state inspected program is the 50-50 cost share that has to meet or exceed federal standards. Cooperative interstate shipping is obviously a higher level of regulatory standards. So it was absolutely correct what was mentioned earlier, that it's cost prohibitive. So even at a higher cost share, we have to train and put our inspectors through exactly what we would have to do at the federal level. So they would go to all the federal schools. Right now, we do all of our in-house training in the state, sort of on the job, which is obviously a lot cheaper than flying people around the country to go to those classes. So And it's been hard because the cost share, we can't charge user fees or anything of that nature. That's prohibited by the federal program. So our challenge with that is the other half of the cost share has to come from general fund, which most everybody on this call has worked with the legislature and knows how difficult it is or has been in past sessions to get that. So, yeah, I do think the cost piece is a primary driver. Because the higher cost of training, the higher cost of, and obviously I think we would probably pay our employees a lot more if we had them trained to that higher level. We probably have to go on the federal pay scale, which is going to add a lot of cost to the program. The only thing that's maybe hopeful out there is the current legislation that would increase the cost share on CIS to 80%. If that were to pass, maybe we could relook at the finances and see if that's feasible. I mean, the major advantage you get from CIS is being able to ship across state lines. But there's certainly a reason that only 4 out of the 27 states that have state meat inspection have chosen to take that next level, even with 15% more in cost share. And it's just because the bang for the buck, what you put out versus what you're able to attain in terms of greater markets just doesn't play out. But maybe at a higher cost share, if that federal legislation is to find a home and pass, it may be something that we would be willing to look at again.
The real deal here is that Montana has the capacity to process less than 20% of the meat we eat. Our school children are eating burger from Brazil. Our hospitals and our institutions and our universities are eating meat from Brazil. It's because we don't have the capacity, and we don't have the capacity, again, because of that white elephant in the room, the corporate monopolies. I'm a young farmer, damn it. And when I first started farming, Montana processed 70% of its meat.
Yeah, so this is Becky. This conversation between Cart and Mike Honeycutt and Walt illustrates the circular problem that we're in. And the background to all of those accurate statements is that there has really, in the past up till now, been very little political pressure for the legislature and the Department of Department of Livestock to really move beyond the state inspected program, because as Walt says, the market for these small scale meat processors has been limited. And as somebody started doing this a while ago, we used to be shipping boxes by FedEx around the countryside, but now there is a much greater local demand, which is fantastic, and much greater regional understanding of the merits of this more decentralized system. But we still have to figure out what forces are going to push the center of gravity away from the monopoly system, which Walt is correctly worried about. And to be blunt about it, I think there is a great deal of interest in the livestock industry for returning to the 2019 status quo, where you can ship feeder animals and beyond that say, I see nothing, I hear nothing, I know nothing. And now we're seeing some real shifts in the earth beneath us within the cattle industry of people who are recognizing that, in fact, cool is important. Some people who didn't previously want to acknowledge it for a variety of complicated reasons. So the truth is, Walt is absolutely correct. That is the elephant in the living room. But politically, the consumers and the center of gravity of the livestock industry aren't going to push for change unless they see a vision of an economically, ecologically viable, decentralized alternative. And so our job really, we don't have the luxury of focusing only on the monopoly or only on rebuilding a small.
Yeah. And
I want to emphasize a little bit what Becky said there. It's not Montana Department of Livestock. It is not the Montana Department of Agriculture that's preventing us from doing this. It's the USDA and their protectionist rules that they have in place that were put in place by the NCBA and the Packer lobbyists. And I love this meetings. and I've been and learned a whole lot from them, and I'm going to continue to participate. But damn it, we're not going to fix this problem until we convince the consumers they want it. And that's why Montana Farmers Union has started the Food Security for Us, FORUS.com. We need to educate the consumers about cheap food policy and how it is the corporate control of the food dollar, not about cheap food. And it's and locally produced, locally processed food is not more expensive than this corporate imported shit that we're eating right now.
So I'm just going to chime in with a couple thoughts. You know, there is the bigger picture. There is the consolidation in the industry. There is the lack of cool labeling. Certainly, those are all issues, and they've been issues for a long time. And we can keep banging our head against that wall and not seeing a lot of movement in that direction, or we can create the viable alternative. That when we finally do dismantle that consolidated industry, there has to be an alternative in its place, or we're going to have meat shortages. So my emphasis in my work is to build that alternative and to convince the consumers that alternative is important. If they want to buy cheaper beef from Brazil and they don't care where it comes from, then that's what they're going to get. But if we can convince them that supporting Montana producers and rural economies and keeping dollars circulating within your economy is more important than saving a few pennies, then we can create that alternative. So I encourage you to sort of fight for that alternative rather than just fight against the things that you don't like. Fight to build the things that you do want instead. So that is not just the meat processors, but that's the brands. You guys need to start working together to create, you know, a Montana brand or regional brands, farmers working together. I mean, in the meat school, we have hundreds of farmers, each with their own individual rinky-dink brand selling 10 to 20 beeves a year. That's not going to cut it. Those farmers are never going to get their meat on the shelf of a grocery store. If we can get 100 small producers with 20 beeves a year to go in on a regional brand and agree to a common set of standards and work with one processor to control their quality, maybe even vertically integrate by purchasing the processing themselves or becoming part owners in the processing, then you can start getting on store shelves. Then you can start moving the needle. But if everyone's doing their own thing, trying to create their own individual brands, we're never going to be able to scale up the alternative. So those are just a few thoughts.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that too, Rebecca. I think you're right, and I would accentuate the regionalism. I do think it's more than just if we get kind of state-centric in this, it's not necessarily such a good idea. I think in terms of building that somewhat intermediated size of brand. And I also think it's important to emphasize, as Lauren Gwynn many years ago, and I did say her, you could read her dissertation, I'll send it to any one of you, it's still applicable, is it required, and even then it wasn't working, but it requires a differentiation of the product. We need to differentiate the product. And I don't think it's just on the basis of, you know, Montana grown, which is everybody wants to say, but I think it's things like grass finished. I think it's connecting in certified organic, in my opinion, but things that differentiate the product as the way to get into those medium to larger markets that have to be regionally based. But then we're stuck again back at this idea that we can't, either through a cooperative program or through the change in law, because those packers don't want to. I mean, Tester has a bill in Congress right now that would change the ability us to ship interstate. Getting that passed is the same lobbyists that, you know, that are prevented in the first place. But you got that passed, and you did differentiate, and you built even the capacity to finish animals. I mean, we're not a state that knows how to finish animals ready for things. That's what we're finding when I work with the block feed. We have no supply. We have to work with essentially cull cattle to start this thing if we're going to reap it all. And it's kind of crazy, but it's because we don't have enough finished cattle And I would say grass finished would even be better. So all of that has to happen and even then, you're right, Walter's right. It's a very difficult notion because of the monopoly control and power and price. But yes, all of those and above. But again, regionalism and the idea of getting into interstate, getting around the state-centric notion.
And we really do need to work on educating the consumer. I agree, Rebecca. And it's great all in theory to be able to combine and regionalize and get a regionalized label. But the problem is that most of the food that is distributed in Montana comes from Walmart, Costco, Albertsons, and good luck trying to get space on their shelf.
So we have, NCAT's been doing a distribution study, and some of the preliminary numbers coming out have been pretty eye-opening. So we focus mostly on central and eastern Montana. This is all food, not just meat, but it's definitely looking at remote and reservations, and overall everybody is getting food across central and eastern Montana unless they have an Albertsons. Even Albertsons though is coming out of Salt Lake. They are moving associated foods out of Salt Lake. That's where the primary source of all of our food comes from in most of our remote and rural areas of Montana. So along that lines, and part of why we did that distribution study was to understand that food system and where the food's actually coming from. And I think that when we're talking about all of this, we also need to be talking about distribution panels and all of that. And amen, Walter, I think you're right on point on all of this, but we have a lot of efforts on the local grounds to develop localized food systems, food hubs. We have the Yellowstone ones who I see are here on the ground. How do we continue to build these food systems? And I think it needs to be a little bit more than branding meat alone. It's branding Montana food. And then how do we feed Montanans? And then how do we go further out and start feeding the other parts of our country to make those businesses sustainable? Because there's only so many Montanans in the state. So we're here, by the way. Co-ops are here. We're ready to work with any of you guys to build those.
The one change I've noticed since COVID, and this is the Court Gents with the Department of Ag, is there's been interest from what I'd call the mid-tier buyers, your Wendy's, your McDonald's, your restaurant chains, and maybe paying a little extra and having a more developed and regional food chain that wasn't present before COVID. As those plants went offline and Wendy's and burger chains faced the idea that they would somehow not be able to sell burgers because they would run out of the supply chain, I think it created an interesting change in possibly people who different than the traditional let's get everybody to buy local movement, the sense of restaurant chains at least having an interest in not necessarily having the world's really ultra cheap, ultra simple food chain, because if it breaks down, it derails them.
Yeah.
And it would not surprise me if Wendy's put some money behind it.
Yeah. In the Western Meat School, we have a buyer from Burgerville, which is a regional chain out here in Oregon and Washington, and they're starting to procure ground beef from cull cows, and then also chicken locally. And they've been invested in that for a while, but COVID has definitely pushed them even further in that direction, and they're actually starting to put some money behind that effort. So I agree. I think there's opportunity there for sure. Other thoughts?
So Rebecca, I'm not sure where this is heading, but I've enjoyed these conversations and I've definitely learned a lot. But one thing that I think we're all or maybe it's just me, I want to actually start developing some strategies that move this conversation into action. I think we're all doing our parts in individual areas, but can we actually start moving this needle if we start working collaboratively together on actual projects? I think the networking and the building of relationships has been incredible, especially given the situation that half of you guys have not met in person, but through Zoom and those type of things. And Jamie, maybe this is more that, but what are those next steps for us to start actionable items and start addressing some of these key things that we've definitely been laying out the last several months, weeks, whatever it's been.
Well, I think there's probably a lot of ways to move the needle there in Montana, but a few that I can think of are you guys have really modeled the meat cutter apprenticeship program in one of the first states to get an approved apprentice program that I think is also you can get college credit out of as well. There might be someone on this call who helped spearhead that, but training the next generation of meat cutters, because without labor, we can't do any of this. And labor is the biggest hang up for expanding small scale meat processing. Secondly is having producers that understand meat marketing and are willing to take that next step and become entrepreneurs and not just passive participants in the food supply, taking whatever dollar they can get, but actually actively trying to create markets for themselves. So the Western Meat School, I think, is a good example of that, but other education that MSU and others can do to provide that technical assistance. And then third is technical assistance to processors. So you have all these processors now getting this grant money. Is there any money in your state to provide one-on-one technical assistance to those processors to make sure they utilize that money effectively, they strategically invest those dollars to help build their capacity, improve their operational efficiencies, have cost savings, so that they can improve their margins and profitability and be able to get more animals safely through their plants. I would say those are 3 ways you can move your needle there.
So Rebecca, I am working on getting a meat processors curriculum started. MSU Northern, the chancellor there, is very excited about it. And I'm leveraging a grant that I got from Governor Bullock to purchase a mobile slaughter unit that we're going to place near the University of Northern. And I'm trying to find the person that's going to operate that mobile slaughter plant. I'm hopeful I'll be able to get somebody out of Canada, because they have Olds College has the only curriculum in North America that teaches from kill, slaughter to package. And our goal there is to create this as a cooperative. And we're just going to produce carcasses and quarters and halves and supply those to the butcher shops that have been getting upgraded and are right now forced to use Brazilian beef to process because they can't get it from anywhere else. And you know, the reason again that we don't have finished cattle here in Montana, and we do have, and we can have it easily ramped up quickly, is that the slaughter plants are in the Midwest, and it doesn't make any sense to ship a fat cow to Iowa, Colorado, and Nebraska. It makes more sense to ship a calf. And but yet we still have a lot of producers who are finishing cattle here and would like to finish more. And it's not seasonal problems because of Montana's weather, unless you're trying to do grass-fed. It's really just because that's the corporate monopolies have dictated when they want us to do it. And we can meet the demand quite easily. We did just a few years ago. Well, maybe 50 years ago. But anyhow, we were able to do it then, and there's no reason we can't do it now. But you're exactly right. The missing link right now is finding help to fill these processing plants. And this program will train inspectors that our state can use as well.
Rebecca, this is Jamie. I have a quick question about the niche meat processor network relationship with the state of Oregon. Can you maybe detail that a little bit?
Well, we're housed at Oregon State University. That's our sponsor university, but we don't necessarily serve Oregon any more so than we do other states. I have been collaborating with our Department of Agriculture since the beginning of COVID because they reached out to me and started thinking about developing a state meat inspection program. And so I've been providing them some advice on that and also helping them think about a grant program similar to what you guys did. Unfortunately, Oregon blew all its CARES Act funding on other stuff, so we don't have any money for that. But I was trying to emphasize the need that until there's capital investments into these custom exempt plants, they're not going to be able to come under state inspection. So just creating a state inspection program doesn't mean anyone's actually going to be able to come under inspection. And a lot of these facilities are in pretty rough shape. So yeah, I'm kind of working on the backside, just providing input on their policy changes.
So this is Becky. I don't know why I got cut off earlier. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Walt's comments are an illustration of what I was saying when I got cut off, is that we can't really afford to only think about the monopoly problems or only think about the niche meat development. We really have to be working on both, and that's in part what he's trying to do. So my question for you, Rebecca, in all your research into plants around the country, seasonality doesn't completely describe what all the challenges are to small meat packers. And I'd like to get your sense of, if you look at the different problems of one, regular supply, one, the cost of offal and other waste disposal or mechanisms for selling byproducts, or the cost of energy generation and composting, the various different ways that small plants can skin a cat that the big packers can't. Do you have a sense of where the low-hanging fruit is to enable new and growing meat packers to become more financially and logistically nimble so that they can help create a vision, an alternative to the monopolistic system we have bit by bit?
That's a great question, Becky. There's a couple of things. There's, sort of cost containment, and then there's ways to improve profitability. And from a cost containment side, definitely having to pay to landfill offal and hides can be quite a big expense if a processor doesn't have their own land in which they can compost that material. If they actually have to pay to have it carted away, that can be a significant expense. But their largest expense is always going to be labor, and securing a year-round skilled labor supply is still, I think, the pinch point for small plants all over the country. And then probably their second largest expense is utilities. So grant programs like the REAP program that funds energy efficiency projects and renewable energy projects, that's something that NCAT could help processors apply for and utilize more effectively. We're talking utilities on the range of tens of thousands of dollars a year to cool a facility and also for lighting. So those are some ways to contain costs. And then profitability, definitely having year-round volume running through the plant, but also making investments in operational efficiencies, things like roll stock machines that make packaging and labeling a lot faster. You can buy a $250,000 roll stock machine and pay it off in about 5 years and save yourself about 2 employees' wages. And plus, having that machine allows you to produce packaging that's more retail ready. So that opens up a lot more opportunities for your farmers to get products onto retail shelves. So having consistent supply year round and then making really wise investments in improving efficiency at the plant. Those are a couple ideas I have.
Thanks.
Hey, Rebecca, this is Matt Skoglund, and I'm a bison producer here, and we process locally. Right now everything we do is custom exempt. sell direct to consumer, pre-sell each animal. And I guess circling back to your initial question about Montana and what it looks like with all this grant money, I think from what I've seen, it's right now it's too soon, because it's it's going to take a while for all of the infrastructure improvements to be made, coolers to be built and freezers to be built. But from what I've seen, and talking to the processors we work with, there just isn't, in Montana, there's an incredible, the increased demand for Montana meat since COVID is huge, for a variety of reasons. And then also Montana's unique, or I don't know about unique, but there's more and more people because of COVID moving here. So there'll be more, consumers, whether we like it or not, moving to Montana, fleeing other places. And I guess my question, and first just want to say thanks for everything that you do. I love your website and your guys' listserv, and really appreciate all the info out there. It's incredibly helpful. But as far as the labor problem, because I know that that's a huge issue, I'm wondering if you've seen any, creative solutions in other states, whether it's recruiting folks to move places or part-time solutions. Just wondering if you could speak more about what you've seen on the labor front.
That's a great question, Matt. I did hear about one creative solution in this panel that I was on the other day with a processor in North Carolina. So when the large packers closed down and the employees of those facilities stopped going to work there because they were scared for their lives, this small processor was able to recruit a whole bunch of employees from those large packers. And I was at first dubious that any of them would work out, because they're used to working on assembly lines and they're not cutters necessarily. He said he went through quite a few, but then he was able to settle in on like 10 employees that really wanted to learn, were super excited about working in a small, safe plant that provided good wages and benefits and more of a family atmosphere, and really cared about their employees as opposed to the Smithfield plant. And so that has really helped him. It helped him double their capacity by bringing on those new employees. So I don't know if you have any large scale facilities in your state where they could recruit employees from, or neighboring states, but by really emphasizing, better wages, benefits, the family atmosphere, the fact that the facility, people are spaced out, there's less risk of transmission of COVID, and that they just truly care about the health and welfare of their employees. I think that that's a way that small plants can differentiate themselves. And also the fact that you're way less likely to get repetitive use injuries in these small plants because you're doing everything. And these small plants are much more nimble and able to train employees to do everything from kill through cutting through packaging. And so employees get to learn lots of different stuff. They don't have to be doing the same thing every day. There's opportunities for growth and skills development, and not getting injured. So those are some ways that I think small processors can differentiate themselves and attract employees maybe from conventional meat packing plants. But yeah, I don't have any other silver bullets with regards to labor.
I got to jump off this call, Rebecca, but I really do appreciate this presentation. I learned a lot from you. I'm going to be checking out your web pages, and I'm probably going to be giving you a call to pick your brain some more. Thank you very much for this. Thanks again, Jamie, for doing this. And I have to get going. Talk to you later.
Thanks,
See you,
Walter.
Walter.
Thanks, Walt.
So Matt, something to consider too, and we're starting to see this across the US, and my counterparts are working on it, is they're using workforce cooperatives. And so the workers actually own and they're invested in it. And so there's a layer of that ownership and that pride comes into it. We're seeing possibly one form in the state of Montana. It's too early for me to really discuss about that. But when the workers own and they use that cooperative model, it brings some pride, and then they're willing to do more. And so, you know, it's not a new model by any means, but that conversion over to worker owned is definitely an option for us.
So this is Tommy. I was on I virtually attended a local community meeting in central Montana, essentially a grassroots feasibility group. And the labor issue obviously was a central point in that discussion. And even in this area of central Montana, they were saying housing is still an issue. And as a community, if they really wanted this plant, you know, they were talking about, can we come together and either retain a local person that we can get trained, or if we bring in some labor, you know, can the community figure out to help on the housing front as a recruitment and retention incentive? Because housing is, even in rural communities, is hard to find in Montana, apparently. And then just to subsidize the housing, because it's still going to be hard to pay a decent wage. So anyway, that was just a direction that conversation went for a little while. And then, you know, just trying to rack our brains, brainstorming outside the box, you know, on the retention side of things, particularly when the oil patch fires back up, or every business and construction company, every fast food restaurant to construction company in Bozeman has hiring signs out. And those are hard jobs to, you know, compete with. And then, like I said, when the oil patch fires up as well, you know, just a big pull for competent manual labor.
Yeah, and I've thought the same thing, Tommy, driving, you know, like on 7th and Bozeman and seeing giant posters, you know, offering really, really good paying wages for jobs that they can't fill. But I guess just to put it on everyone's radar, and Rebecca, because you're, you know, so connected in this world around the country, there's an example, Rawhide Meats in White Sulphur Springs, Montana. Beautiful location, great small town. The owner, Don DeGroff, he goes by Grizz. He's a great guy. We've become good friends. And, you know, Rawhide is for sale right now. And according to Grizz, you know, he does very well. They do very well financially. And they got a grant. They've already put in the new wing for the expansion, and then they're going to move like the office and break room and everything in there and build a new cooler. And just basically, it's an incredible potential for someone, you know, an entrepreneur, a family that wants to, you know, get into it. So just to the extent that you hear of anyone through your conversations, Rebecca, or anyone else on the call, it's a really nice facility. It's so important to White Sulphur Springs and that whole area, and it's just scary at the thought of losing it, and it's for sale. So to the extent that, you know, it's just a great opportunity that's out there.
Matt, could you connect us by any chance? Because I would love to talk to the employees about a conversion if they're interested.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll put my contact info in the chat box, and you can email me.
Perfect. Sounds good. Jamie, I'm going to have to jump off as well, but as we're talking about housing and workforce, do you think maybe potential future conversations, we could invite Kathleen O'Leary from the Department of Labor? She could maybe educate us about what they're working on, because this is definitely an issue across the board on workforce. And then there is a housing coalition that's extremely active, working across different housing issues and stuff. So maybe we can cross-pollinate some discussions there.
Sure, let's have a chat. Yeah. So we're at an hour, and I guess we'll just first of all thank Rebecca very much for joining us here in Montana virtually. That's one of the blessings of this pandemic. Although I know for MOA, you know, there's nothing like meeting face to face. I'm going to give another plug for Tracy McIntyre has a presentation tomorrow at 4. I think you all should have received an invitation for that, to talk about co-ops more in depth. If not, please just give me a shout via email is probably the best way. And I'm fine staying on if the conversation wants to continue.
I need to go myself,
Oh,
but
okay. Well,
it's been a real pleasure chatting with everyone and hearing about what's going on in your state, and would love to just keep supporting you all and your efforts. So I popped my phone number and email in the chat, and get a hold of me if you want to deep dive more into this discussion. Okay.
thanks so much, Rebecca.
Thank
Thank you, Rebecca.
Bye.
Okay.
Can I share one thing, Jamie?
Of course.
Sorry, I've been very quiet during this meeting, but this has been an excellent conversation. I'm Aubrey Roth, Montana Farm to School Coordinator. And we've talked about it, I think, in a previous call, but there is Schoolhouse Meats, which is a state inspected processing facility that's actually part of Missoula County Public School District. And they are basically training the next generation of employees and doing that workforce development. Of course, that's a more like long-term kind of solution, but I really like those kinds of examples that are really catching, especially youth when they're looking for what direction they want to go in, and kind of putting them into getting the training that they need and getting that foundation so they can fulfill some of those workforce needs. And then just along the lines of that, happy National Farm to School Month, everyone. It is October. And we do have, I plugged it into the chat box, but we have the Montana Farm to School Showcase Farm to Trade Tour on October 27th. So next Tuesday from 3 to 5. And that will be focusing mostly on beef. So we'll have a tour, virtual tours of ranches, a processor, as well as a school kitchen, and then a fun one thrown in there that'll let be a surprise. But that'll be a really fun way to see how beef to school specifically is being implemented, and be able to talk to different stakeholders within that. So I hope you all join us for that. The link for more information and registration is in the chat box.
This is Tommy. I wanted to follow Aubrey with a piece of trivia, just because. A couple years ago on a project that we worked on together, the economist with us, Joel Schumacher, I believe calculated that at current school food lunch participation rates across the entire state, if 30% of the protein component was supplied by beef, it would take right about 900 head. So 30% of the protein component of all the school lunches at current participation rates across a whole state, included beef, would take, I think, just under 900 head. So anyway, like I said, just an FYI or a piece of trivia, but that's not that many cattle, right? To supply all those kids. And then our research also showed that there was a participation rate increases around individual days that served local beef products. Anyway, so maybe it is a little interesting.
Well, thanks, Tommy. That's just another way of saying that we have kind of a dual problem here. Some people are most focused on finding markets for their beef. Some people are most focused on feeding Montana, but either way, whether we're talking about developing a long-term big markets for Montana's very big cattle industry, or whether we're talking about feeding healthy food to our fellow citizens here, we can't really afford to just tackle this problem from one angle. And your numbers sort of put an exclamation point on that. But it really is a restatement of what many people have stated on this call.
Thanks, Becky.
I agree with that. And I was thinking about that during the discussion is like, what are the next steps? I'm such a like action oriented person. I'm just like, let's make the to-do list. Let's assign the tasks. And so I was thinking that it sounds like there's just multiple approaches that kind of need to happen all at the same time, including some policy change to be able to support state inspection or interstate commerce or things like that. In addition to, it could be like helping the institutional markets kind of be more of a player in that and be a better marketplace for Montana beef and other livestock. And so I think there's multiple things that kind of have to happen, not simultaneously necessarily, but I think they kind of need to come together in that way.
Yeah, those are key pieces of the puzzle. I have a question to see if anybody has comments, and if anybody needs to just step off this call, I understand it's past 11, so we don't want to be disrespectful of anybody's time. If you need to leave, go ahead. But I have a general question. In this dual issue of trying to build markets and build capacity at the same time, everybody agrees that ongoing consumer education is essential. I guess I wonder how people feel about how much sort of overt emphasis there needs to be on the fact that we don't really want to rebuild the status quo if it involves both human and animal welfare conditions, which many people, if not most people, agree are not okay. I have some of my own prejudices, but I recognize their limitations, and I wonder if you guys have reactions to that question.
I do have an opinion on marketing to consumers, and that is, it's difficult because for a group like this, you're up against such major power players. I think it is possible. And for one opportunity that we do have, and it's been mentioned today, is the tourists that do come to the state. I think we get 13 million tourists here a year, and to somehow through restaurants, whatever, reach the consumers that way. To go head to head with the major marketing, I think it's extremely difficult.
This is Matt. I guess just building off what Jamie said, I think I agree with Becky, and I think the key is that we don't go head to head with the major marketers and the big folks. We do it differently, and we differentiate ourselves, and that's our marketing strategy. It certainly takes a lot of work, lots of consumer education, but I'm definitely bullish, pun intended. That I've been thinking of that zinger for a while, so I'm glad I got to use it. But on meat in Montana, and just from what I've seen, and also just a lady just emailed me. Sorry, pull this up real quick. Maxine Taylor. She just wrote a book called "There's a Cow in My Freezer: The Complete Guide to Buying, Storing, and Enjoying Pasture-Raised Meat in Bulk." So for I find a lot of what I'm doing is convincing people of why buying a simple chest freezer makes a lot of sense. That book's out there. But anyways, just to go back, I think I totally agree with Becky. I think doing it differently is essential. And then that is how and then the marketing advantage stems from doing it differently.
I have one little quick story, and that's Butcher Box, which positions itself as providing local beef, healthy beef, but that also supplies from Australia. used one of our ranchers' photos from their Facebook page, and he recognized it. Anyway, he, you know, went head to head with this large company to get the photo removed. But it just, one of those things that you see.
Yeah, this is Mike Honeycutt. I want to, you know, I appreciate what Becky said, and I appreciate what Matt just said, and so I'll just, you know, share a little bit of math to think about, and that's where I struggle in this conversation is where you want to go, and I think that's where the conversation gets mixed up a little bit too much between, you know, how you want to take on the major systems, and you know how much revolution, I guess, do you really want to do, or do you want to carve out the niche space for more locally grown, locally sourced food? And the math that always runs through my head is, if we slaughter 32 million head of cattle a year in the United States, and there's 300 million people, give or take, you know, if you extrapolate that to Montana, if we were able to get 100% market share of Montana, that would only use about 180,000 fed and finished cattle a year on the beef side. And you're not going to achieve that. There's going to be people who are going to eat at Wendy's. There's going to be people who eat at McDonald's. There's going to be, you know, there's only a certain segment of that population. So what I always am trying to work back to is, what is the processing capacity that we need in Montana to fit that market? Right now, we locally process about 25,000 head of beef in Montana. So how much more do we need to expand to be able to do that? The conversation, I think, gets muddled when you start talking about trying to convert the entire industry. And so how, and I know Walt's not on to defend statements, but the more of that you can probably put to the side for right now and concentrate on, how do you do consumer education? How do you convert and educate more people? So do you expand those niche local opportunities, and how much processing capacity do we need, and what are the steps that get us there? Whether that's the ability to process 40,000 head, whether that's the ability to process more lamb, which we're not able to do. What segment can bison play in that, Matt, right? Where is that? How can we educate consumers about putting bison into their diet that don't currently do that? I mean, those are the things, I think, from a marketing aspect that sort of drive what your processing capacity needs to be, and can kind of make this manageable. But when the conversation becomes about taking on the big chains, taking on the big packers, you know, I think that's when the mountain just looks too big to climb. And locally, Montana doesn't have the market for that. And what I hear from all of you is, unless you're willing to figure out how to get your product into Denver, Portland, Seattle, Salt Lake, San Francisco, which is not locally grown, locally sourced, then you're not going to really have the market to process 1 million head of cattle in Montana, because we'll have way more meat than we need. And then we'll just be trying to compete directly with those big marketers by getting shelf space in the urban areas. And I don't know that you know, that's going to be feasible for us, especially when Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, California, Washington, Oregon are all trying to do the exact same thing we're trying to do right now. So those are just my random thoughts, and thank you for letting me share them.
Thanks, Mike.
Well, you know, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, you know, of course, these are all key points, and we're getting a little bit circular, because the dilemma of really trying to feed all of Montana affordably often gets wrapped up with having to build some larger markets out of state where we ship beef out of state instead of live animals out of state. So every time we attempt to turn this into an either or discussion in an effort to achieve clarity, we achieve mud. So the bottom line is that different people have different passions and different skills, and I think we're going to have to collectively keep several balls in the air. I mean, Mike is right. You can't just completely overwhelm yourself trying to achieve global revolution all in one fell swoop. That's not possible. But it is not inappropriate to set our sights high with the interest of healthy food for all people and decent animal and human welfare treatment and everybody in the chain. So I guess this leaves us to ask where these calls are going. At one of our previous calls, I essentially made the assertion that until after the election, we probably can't be smartest at developing our strategy. The election is almost upon us. So soon we will have to really lay out the marching orders that somebody started to talk about. I'm well aware of that. And I apologize if this has seemed diffused, and I also apologize for my shaky internet connection or shaky telephone connection. I feel like probably most everybody has to go, so I will stay on if anybody wants to stay on. But otherwise, thank you so much, everybody, for participating, and Jamie for organizing it all. And I guess Rebecca's gone, but we will express our appreciation again to her. And with that, any last critical remarks that anybody wants to make?
Good discussion. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.